Welcome back to another installment of Simple Truths with the Bald Man. I am your host, Pastor Jared, and this time we're going to do something a little bit different. I realize it's just the third video, but in the first one we kind of talked about our purpose and did some search into relationship with God. In the second one we talked about what is sin and talked a little bit about ourselves, the human condition, if you will. In this one, I kind of want to go off in a little bit different direction because I want to cover a myriad of different aspects of life. And honestly, part of getting to that point to decide to accept Jesus and to look into a relationship. Somebody who's not a believer is going to have to overcome the intellectual side of the argument, at least enough to open themselves up to a potential to receive on a deeper level. As human beings, that's the thing. We got to be able to wrap our minds around something. And while I don't think there is any way to truly understand or accept Jesus just in an intellectual way, there's got to be, for some people, there's got to be some kind of an answer, some kind of a seed planted in our mind to get us to that point to open up. So I want to do part of that as well. I want to get into a more worldview kind of a place and talk about some of that kind of stuff. Sorry, I had a plan and I'm kind of just losing some words to it. But anyway, bear with me and this will get better. So I want to start by explaining I am not a scientist. I'm not, I don't have degrees and accolades from higher education forums and institutions. I haven't sat through specific study areas and courses that have told me how to interpret and which way to believe different things. I have done a lot of research on my own. Now, I don't say that to excuse a lack of knowledge or to poke holes in the information I'm going to give you. I say that rather to show that that's not always necessary, that you as a regular person can understand more than you think you can, and can understand more than a lot of people will give you credit for. What I know through my own personal research. I know through going and finding things on my own, and through using and employing critical thinking to see more truth than what a lot of people see in a lot of the information that's out there. So I'm going to get into a series talking about science and some of the major disproving God type sciences, evolution and old Earth versus young Earth, and some of that kind of stuff. And I don't know exactly how in depth this subject is going to get in our videos, but I do know that there's too much for one video. I've been trying to keep them more in the half-hour range, and there's no way I can cover everything that I want to cover in a half hour, so it's going to take multiple videos, maybe not consecutive videos, because there's other stuff to talk about and other subjects that'll come up, and hopefully, I'll start getting some feedback, and you guys will start asking some questions so we can start addressing some of those as well. But this is not all going to happen in one video. Matter of fact, this particular video may be a little less interesting to people because because I'm essentially going to do a bunch of definition type information in this one, and then getting into the actual meat of what I want to talk about will be in subsequent videos. But right now I want to try to offer some definitions and really clarify some things so that it's easier to understand, because that's kind of what we do here at Simple Truth. I want to make things easier to understand and get you to digest some information so that moving forward into the other videos you can keep that information in mind and understand better what I'm saying in those. So the first thing I want to talk about is scientific theory. Now, a lot of the things that, well, some of the majors, like I said, you get into evolution versus creation. Evolution is a scientific theory. Now, there's a lot of people out there that will argue scientific theory is different from just theory. The term theory means an idea or a hypothesis. Theory, just as its own a standalone word, the definition is really kind of an open-ended. It's not a, it's not a definitive thing. It's an idea. This is what I think happened. This is my theory. Scientific theory, people will tell you, is defined in with a more specific and definitive kind of a way. It's really not. It's defined with bigger words and with a different use of words, but really scientific theory is still theory. And I'm going to explain it. So here's what happens. Here's how something becomes scientific theory in a simplified version. So I have a hypothesis. Now, a hypothesis is an idea. It is a hunch, if you will. My hypothesis is, A plus B equals C. And I am going to test that hypothesis and use a scientific method to determine the accuracy of my hypothesis. So I'm going to do not just a test, but several tests. Maybe I use multiple different materials, multiple different areas, or whatever. I'm going to include, I'm going to do controls. I'm going to introduce variables and whatever, and we're going to find out over a large sample section of experimentation, does A plus B equal C? And at the end of all that, I'm going to take all that information, I'm going to plug it all in and look at the results and then verify or calculate what the results are telling me. At the end of that, I'm going to come up with one of three answers. Either 1, A plus B does equal C, and we found that consistently over our testing, and so we can say this is factual, it's not a theory, it's no longer a hypothesis, it is truth, it's fact. We're going to come up with number 2, our testing showed that A plus B does not equal C, it's not factual, we got a consistent failure in our experimentation, and therefore this is not fact, throw it aside, we still have not figured out the answer. Or number 3, we're going to get inconsistent results, and we're going to find that there is no that A plus B equals C by itself does not answer the question, because sometimes yes, sometimes no. Or we're going to find that there are variables that prevent us from even creating a proper experiment and testing these things. That's where things like evolution come into play, because you cannot recreate evolution. Assuming for a moment evolution is true, it takes millions of years. You can't recreate it and observe it and see it happen. You just can't do it. We can't go back and see it happen from the past to now. All we can do is work from here backwards and then try to take all the pieces, the individual pieces of evidence that are found, and arrange them and see what they, see if they look plausible as the explanation. So that's what brings us, that's the second step. Form a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, then you come to a conclusion. Yes, no, don't know. So scientific theory begins at don't know. So you get an inconclusive or an untestable hypothesis, and you take all of the evidence that you found that brought you to your idea, everything that you used to create your hunch, and you put all that data together, and you assemble the story of why I think this is the case, why I think A plus B equals C, why I can't prove A plus B equals C, but why it seems plausible to me. I take all that data, I then pass that on to another expert in the field, someone who is my peer. It's basically a peer review process. So I give it to a peer. That peer looks at all my data. They attempt to do their own experimentation. They find that they can't do their own experimentation. They look at my evidence that I supplied with them, any evidence that maybe they have found that's not included in mine, and they apply that to the story, and then they determine, yes, I think what you're saying is plausible. No, I don't think what you're saying is plausible. It works for me or it doesn't work for me. Agree, disagree. That's basically what happens. Then that person sends the data back to me with their conclusion. I take my conclusion and I send it to someone else. They do the same thing. They send the data back to me with their conclusion. I send it to somebody else. And I do this, several times, just like the experimentation phase. I do it several times. All those people send their data back to me. I put it in, I calculate it, and I get all the yes, I think you're right, and all the no, I don't think you're right information. And I see, who I see the percentage, who wins out. Yes, I think you're right. Then it becomes scientific theory. No, I don't think you're right. Then it's not an accepted scientific theory, and it's out. So here's the problem with that. If I have a theory, if I have a hypothesis, and I really truly believe that it's right, when I pick the people that I'm going to send to peer review it, pardon me, I apologize. When I pick the people that I'm going to send it to for peer review, I'm going to pick people that I know, that I trust, that think like me. I'm very likely going to send it to people that I believe will come out with the same opinion as me. It's entirely possible that I could skew the results just by who I pick to look at my information. And it's a corruptible system. I'm not saying everything is corrupt. I'm not saying everybody does that. I'm just saying it's easy to do. I can corrupt the results of my peer review by who I choose to peer review it. So coming to a scientific theory that's really, it's not impossible to corrupt the findings. And really, scientific theory is defined by how you interpret the evidence, how a group interprets the evidence. So any process that is human is corruptible. That's the short and long of it. And so you've got these theories that people have accepted and pushed into a mainstream situation that may not be really the most plausible answer, or may not be the only answer, or maybe it is a plausible. Maybe a lot of people did peer review it and say, yeah, we think this is probably what happened. And then those same people may stand against competing theories, which is what happened in the case of evolution in education facilities, particularly in the junior high and high school level. What you had is a whole bunch of people who got together and petitioned against any other theory being taught in the classroom to students outside of an evolution theory. And so a lot of school systems adopted that and decided, this is the only thing that we're going to teach. So no other theories are welcome. No other scientific theory is welcome. It's just this, period. Here's the deal. Scientific theory gets debunked sometimes. There are times that scientific theory turns out to be wrong and is found to be wrong down the line. So you can't just take scientific theory and say, well, it's scientific theory, it's got to be true, because that's not the case. Sometimes it falls apart. Sometimes it doesn't. But most of the time, scientific theory is never verified actual truth, because it just can't be, because of circumstances won't allow. And so there's never really a solid answer. It's just, this is what is accepted as the most plausible, and then move on. Here's the thing. Things like evolution, the scientific community is kind of moving away from. And the reasons for that are, like, number one, the origin story. The only real origin story for evolution was spontaneous, I don't remember what it's called, but spontaneous life. Basically, it's the primordial soup situation. You have Earth formed billions of years ago. There's no atmosphere. There's rain, radioactive rain from space, falls for millions of years on the Earth, creates this mud and this sludge that pools up in the low-lying areas and just becomes stagnant and gross and starts to decay and just becomes this, ooze of radioactive rock material and lifelessness that just spontaneously produces living organisms. That was the only theory that ever gained any traction, and Louis Pasteur disproved that in his laboratories, 200 years ago? I don't know the exact dates, but a long time ago, it was disproved. It was thrown out. Can't happen. And I don't know the details of how he did that. I just know that the scientific community agrees. He disproved it. That is not the origin story. Problem is, that's the only possible origin story, other than a creator. Either there was no life, and then for some reason life just happened spontaneously on its own, or something created life. God exists. Maybe not the God of Abraham, maybe some other cosmic being, whatever, but there had to be something that created the original life, or it had to spontaneously create itself. That one's disproved. This one is not acceptable. And that's really what it boils down to. There was even a quote I read, and I don't remember. I'll try to find it and link the article to it in here. But there was a quote I read by the scientist who said, spontaneous life, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting directly, I'm not looking at it right now, but he basically said spontaneous life is impossible. We've proved that. However, it had to happen that way because it's the only explanation. So we are left with an impossible explanation to where we are now. That is human obstinance refusing to allow any other explanation in. That's all it is. And we're good at that as human beings. So a couple other definitions I want to get in real quick before I get all the way through this. Evidence. Okay? And these are some of the key words that people throw around. And so I want to cover these. Evidence. People will say there's tons of evidence for this. There's no evidence for that. That people will say that to defend their position. Here's the problem. Evidence doesn't work that way. Evidence is an individual item. The way evidence works is you walk into a crime scene. You see that a window's busted out, that there's items that are obviously missing, and there's, skid marks on the street outside. Okay? That's 3 individual pieces of evidence. Skid marks on the street, windows busted out, something's missing. Those things put together, your mind will automatically put those together and suggest burglary occurred. But the evidence doesn't say that. That's just what our mind creates from that evidence. Those skid marks on the street, they may be 2 days old. That window may have been busted out by a neighbor kid yesterday with the baseball. That stuff that's missing, maybe I went and pawned it. Maybe this perfect storm of events all happened, and burglary is actually not the answer. Maybe it is. But the thing is, those individual pieces of evidence do not tell that story until you arrange them in that way. And, that's a very oversimplified explanation, but that's the deal. Those individual pieces of evidence do not tell the story. We do. We arrange them in the way that we need to so that we can understand the story, and we call that proof. And that is the next definition that I want to throw out there. Proof is not truth. It's not the same thing. Simply put, proof is arranging evidence into a story that we are willing to accept. Proof is the narrative that we want to believe, and if we can arrange the evidence so that it tells that story. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you cannot take the individual pieces of evidence and make the story you want to make. But most times you can. Sometimes it takes some stretching. But proof is not truth. Proof is subjective. So the same pieces of evidence that suggest evolution can also be used to suggest creation. It's just a matter of what you're willing to accept and what you're not. Truth is different. Truth is immovable, unchangeable, not always available. We can't always definitively find truth. I don't think until this life is over we will have the easy access to the truth of creation versus evolution, to the truth of any of it. The truth that God does exist, I do not think will ever be blatantly available to everyone until Judgment Day. There will come a time when everyone will see God and will have that absolute truth, whether they want it or not. They will have undeniable evidence in front of them, undeniable situation where they cannot escape the truth, even if it's not the story they want to hear. But that's the definition of truth. It's real. It's immovable. You may not like the truth, but the truth is immovable. You may not always find the truth, but it doesn't change the truth. Proof and truth are not the same thing. Proof is subjective. That's why you take individual pieces of evidence in a crime, present them to a jury, and the jury can either go guilty or not guilty, and it's all up to how they interpret it, and they may be wrong. Sometimes the jury is wrong because you cannot always present truth. Now, truth in a situation like that would be, security camera footage. You see all this evidence that says the butler did it, then you get the security camera footage, and it turns out the father-in-law did it, and you didn't see it, you didn't interpret it that way, whatever. But now you have truth where you didn't have it before. So those are all things I want you to digest, and I want you to carry into the rest of this video series with you, because Because there's a lot more question marks than what people are willing to admit in a lot of the prevailing theories and the prevailing methods that are used to support these theories and stuff like that. And I want you to look at things not from my perspective, not from their perspective. I want you to look at things from your perspective. I want you to go research some stuff yourself. I want you to employ your critical thinking skills and see, do you think what I have to say is plausible, accurate? Do you think what they have to say is plausible or accurate? Are the question marks bigger than what you'd ever considered before? Because there's a couple different groups of people. Well, I'd say about 3. There's those who are going to interpret the evidence to mean evolution. There's those who are going to interpret the evidence to mean creation. And then there's those who are never going to look at evidence at all, and they're just going to choose evolution or creation based on, I just want it that way. So that's what I want you to do, is to think for yourself and say, what is my chosen view of what happens? And is that really as definitive as I think it is? Or are there more questions than I realized? Is there more room for doubt than I realized? Is it possible that what I want to think and the truth may not be the same thing? So that's what I'm tasking you with, along with send me emails. As long as I'm having to, until I get your emails, I'm doing this on my own. I'm coming up with my own content. You guys have the opportunity to write future content for this. You know what you need to know. I don't. So if you'll ask me questions, I can address them to you. We can personalize this a little bit and get to the information that you need to hear. Until then, you're just stuck with whatever I come up with. So email me, simpletruths. Email is simplebaldman@hotmail. I believe I'll link it down below. And then you can always get a hold of us on the website, accburney.com. I'll also link that. Until next time, love you guys. Praying for you. I can't wait to get into this a little deeper, and hopefully it'll get a little more interesting in the next video. We'll get into some meat of the subject and actually get into some examples and things like that. Appreciate your time. Be blessed.